Hello and welcome to another episode of the ICC Academy Livecast, a new podcast series where we take a deeper dive into global business trends and ideas. I'm your host, Thomas Paris, and in this episode, we will learn about the upcoming United Nations Climate Change Conference, and specifically why Article 6 is key to improving collective action. We have two special guests today. Stefano de Clara is Director of International Policy at the International Emissions Trading Association, and we're happy to welcome our returning inaugural speaker, Majda Dabaghi, Director at the International Chamber of Commerce for Inclusive and Green Growth. So thank you so much for joining us. How are you both doing?
I'm fine,
Great.
Thank you.
Looking forward to COP and to this webcast.
Stefano, you're a new face to the ICC Academy audience. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and your current role?
Sure, and thanks for having me on this webinar. So my name is Stefano de Clara, and I work as the International Policy Director at IETA, the International Emissions Trading Association. IETA is a non-profit business organization that has been around for 20 years now, and it brings together businesses from a wide range of different sectors in support for carbon pricing and emission trading systems as a way to put a price on CO2 emissions. In IETA, I personally focus on international policy, which means having a lot to do with the negotiations on the implementation of the Paris Agreement and more specifically the negotiations on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that, for reasons that we will discuss in a second, is seen as a key article for international carbon markets.
Perfect. And so, Majda, thank you again for joining us on the ICC Livecast. You, your team, and the Secretary General have been leading the ICC Climate Change Dialogue with a global megaphone. What can you tell us about this year's UN Climate Change Conference?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's really great to have Stefano here with us today as well. They've been a really key partner of the business community throughout the UNFCCC climate conferences, and their expertise is really indispensable. So happy to have them on this livecast with us, and especially heading into COP25, where the real focus is going to be on enhancing ambition. And Article 6 is a real part, a really key part of that ambition story. So, as you know, ICC is the UNFCCC focal point for business. So our role throughout the COP25 negotiations is to really bring a business perspective to the negotiations, and also inversely to try to help the business community understand the nuances of the negotiations. And this year we'll be focusing quite heavily on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which was the sort of the missing link of the Paris rulebook. So what does that all mean? At COP24 in Katowice in Poland last year, it was the year for implementation of the Paris Agreement, and we were able to implement the Paris Agreement and have what we call a Paris rulebook. So clear sort of operational aspects of the Paris Agreement, but the one missing part was on Article 6. As the Chileans are in the presidency for COP25, and their key priority is really on enhancing ambition, we'll need to make sure that we have a complete Paris rulebook, including Article 6, that countries can rely upon as we head into 2020, which is a really big year for climate, when countries are expected to deliver nationally determined contributions that are in line with the Paris Agreement. It'll be necessary for us to have a complete rulebook to help really make sure that those NDCs, those nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies, are ambitious and get us on a path to 1.5 degrees as set out by the IPCC special report on 1.5. So I think that's sort of the framework that we're heading into COP with, and I think it'll be great to hear from Stefano on a little bit more about the subtleties of Article 6 and the importance of this particular article, getting it completed at COP25, what it means for business, and what are some of the sticking points that we should be looking out for in the next few weeks.
Thank you, Majda. I think that's fantastic. This really provides context for the conversation we're about to have. So as you alluded to, and again, this is going to be for you now, Stefano. As you mentioned, the Article 6 is a sort of a missing element for the Paris rulebook. So Stefano, what does this article aim to do?
Thanks, and thank you, Majda, for the spot on introduction on the context for Article 6 and for what COP25 will try to achieve in Madrid. So Article 6 is a key missing element from the Paris rulebook that was adopted at COP25, and it is also a key article in the Paris Agreement, certainly for the business community, but also and possibly even more crucially for parties that will start to implement their NDCs from next year. Article 6 is an article about voluntary cooperation on the NDC implementation. So it effectively allows parties and also the private sector to get together and cooperate on the implementation and on the achievement of their NDC. So effectively of their nationally determined contributions, which are their targets under the Paris Agreement. Article 6 has three main elements. There are provisions for what they are called cooperative approaches that might result in a transfer of mitigation outcomes between parties. So these cooperative approaches are actions that two or more than two parties undertake together to achieve their NDCs. You also have provisions for an emission mitigation mechanism that will facilitate the implementation of projects and actions to reduce CO2 emissions and to make progress towards the achievement of an NDC. And then the third pillar is the establishment of a framework and a work program for known market approaches. And the first two pillars, so cooperative approaches and the emission mitigation mechanism, are the key provisions that have the potential of promoting market approaches under the Paris Agreement to promote mitigation action, and are really at the core of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Article 6, if implemented correctly, has the potential of creating an international market for mitigation outcome, and has the potential of bringing the benefits of market-based policies and market-based approaches in the implementation of NDCs. It is particularly crucial also because it can act as a key driver of carbon pricing, both domestically in individual jurisdictions, and also it could act as a framework to link different domestic policies, resulting in an international framework for carbon pricing. As we move down the decarbonization curve, and as we get closer to the half of the century when we are approaching a net zero emission scenario, as foreseen by the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, Article 6 can be even more crucial because it can effectively link up the few remaining sources of emissions that we will still have with places and countries that have the capacity to act as a net sink of emissions. So it can effectively help achieving net zero as soon as possible and as cost effectively as possible. We at IETA, we have recently started a modeling project to understand a bit better the value of Article 6, and this is a project that we are doing together with the University of Maryland using their GCAM modeling tool, which is also used for IPCC modeling purposes. And the preliminary findings that came out from the research to date suggest that a global market under Article 6 could reduce the cost of achieving NDCs by as much as 320 billion of US dollars by 2030. And this is a cost-saving figure that could be unleashed every year. And if these cost savings are reinvested into additional mitigation action, we could have an extra 9 billion tons of mitigation every year by 2030. So the potential of Article 6 to contribute to keep the cost of achieving NDCs down, as well as to promote additional mitigation is huge. But to unleash that potential, we need, as Majda was saying earlier, we need the rule book for Article 6 to be agreed at COP25. And then after that, we will need for countries to start planning the use of Article 6 as part of their NDC commitment.
Thank you, Stefano. So if we take this explanation and look at it through the lens of the business community, why is the implementation of Article 6 important to business internationally? You mentioned that this could reduce the cost of achieving these the NDCs, or you talk about carbon pricing and climate finance, but how does this impact business?
Well, Article 6 impact business in many ways. So first of all, if we look at the domestic level, as I was saying earlier, Article 6 can effectively act as a key promoter for the uptake of carbon pricing and carbon market policy domestically, and we at IETA, on behalf of our members, have always been a strong advocate for the uptake of carbon markets as a way to put a price on carbon. And so we really value that potential of Article 6 as a promoter of domestic emission trading systems. And at the same time, by allowing countries to cooperate on NDC achievement, and effectively by creating a framework to transfer mitigation outcome across borders, it can also extend the power of markets beyond the boundaries of one jurisdiction. Can, for example, facilitate the linking of different emission trading systems and different carbon pricing policies, and it can create an international framework for carbon markets to emerge effectively extending the benefits of emissions trading at the international level. And most importantly, Article 6 is also the key entry point for business to help with NDC achievement. It is really, in the whole Paris Agreement, the most explicit article that provides means and provides ways for the business community to be engaged in action to help achieving NDCs.
Okay. Majda, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that's a perfect explanation, so we'll leave it there.
Great. So Stefano, back to you. What have been in this process since COP24? What have been the key sticking points in the negotiations for implementing Article 6, and how can we resolve these?
So Article 6 is a really, really complex article because of many different reasons. First of all, it's worth remembering that Article 6 was the last article to be agreed in Paris at COP21. So it was the last article to become part of the Paris Agreement. And that already tells a lot about the different views that parties have on this topic. And it was also a signal that designing the operational rules for Article 6 was not going to be an easy process. Article 6 is difficult because of different reasons. So first of all, as with any other article in the agreement, parties have different views on what that articles should do and how that article should be implemented. But most importantly, Article 6 is probably the only article in the whole agreement where it's really hard to distinguish technical issues from political issues. And so every single element that is discussed under Article 6 has both a technical nature but also a political nature. And it's relatively straightforward in the negotiations to distinguish technical elements from political elements and deal with the technical ones first, and then sort out the remaining political elements at the ministerial level. Whereas for Article 6, it's a bit more difficult to draw that line, and every single element has both technical and political implications. So that is why it's been particularly difficult to get agreement on Article 6 at COP24, and that is why a decision on the Article 6 guidance was deferred to COP25. If we look more closely at what are the key issues under Article 6, we have a big part of what is being discussed with under Article 6 that has to do with accounting. So how Article 6 approaches have to be accounted for, and also how Article 6 approaches have to be reconciled with NDC accounting and with accounting under the accounting and reporting under the transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. We have a number of more detailed elements that are only present in Article 6 and that have to be sorted out and implemented. And we also have discussion on how Article 6 approaches, for example, relate with non-NDC purposes, and this is a label and a tag that refers to compliance systems, for example, outside of the UNFCCC. This is, for example, the CORSIA system for international aviation, and possible other compliance obligations under IMO that might arise in the future for the maritime sector. And another big discussion element that creates a lot of division in the room is the whole heritage of the Kyoto Protocol mechanisms and how they should be dealt with under the Paris Agreement. So, for example, There's discussion on how projects and credits from the clean development mechanism that exist under the Kyoto Protocol should be transitioned and accounting for under the Paris Agreement. And beyond that, there are countless elements that have to be resolved. Virtually on almost all elements, parties have different views, so it will be crucial for the negotiations at COP25 to find possible landing zones for those elements that can effectively result in a package that can be agreed by all parties.
Right, and I think that's a really important point. Working on projects that are so multilateral, my question from there is, what goes into a well-designed Article 6? Because all of these discussions have so many different stakeholders. So I'm curious from your point of view. We touched a little bit on the sticking points, and in your opinion, working on such a wide-ranging project, what are some things to keep in mind to make sure that they're successful? What are the things that you have to watch out for?
Sure, and this is really a key question as we get into the COP25 negotiations, and I'm sure it's a question that every single delegate and every single negotiator is asking himself. Right. There will be a great deal of compromise to be made at COP25 if we, if over the 10 days of negotiations we are to bridge all the different positions and come to an outcome that can be agreed by everyone. And as I was saying earlier, the positions, especially on some topics, are really far apart. So there will be a great deal of compromises and trade-offs to be made to come to a middle ground or to come to a landing zone that is acceptable. And as we go through that process and as we start to bridge positions, I think few key considerations to be kept in mind is that the final outcome will obviously have to be a compromise, but cannot under any circumstance be compromising the environmental integrity, the robustness, and the credibility of the system. And that, I think, will be the major red line for the business community, certainly, but also for almost every party in the negotiation. It's hard to it's easy sometimes to lose sight of what the key red lines are as you get through the negotiations. But the absolute must is to obtain something as the COP25 outcome on Article 6 that can be trusted by countries, by the business community, and by the civil society as a robust mechanism that can ensure environmental integrity. If we get an outcome that is not trusted, then the potential value in terms of economic benefits and environmental benefits will not be achieved because no one will really trust the system, and we will see really little action under Article 6. So I think the key aspect that the deal will have to ensure will be credibility, meaning that the system will have to be robust and will have to ensure environmental integrity.
Okay. So, Majda, you and your team are going to be at COP25, and just for those listening, I mean, you might already be there. So, as the voice of business representing ICC along with your colleagues, what role will you be playing on this discussion, specifically on Article 6 and carbon pricing?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, our team will be on the ground for the full 2 weeks of COP, and we will also have our chair, Paul Pullman, on the ground, as well as our Secretary General, John Denton, on the ground. And the message really coming from ICC is really along the lines of what Stefano was mentioning. The most important aspect of all of this is to ensure that we keep climate change high on the political agenda, and that we don't lose sight of the ambition that's needed in order for us to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And so on all aspects of our messages to governments, will really be pushing for enhanced ambition and also making sure that policymakers understand that business is completely behind this ambition. We have seen an unprecedented mobilization of the business community, both the multinational companies, but also SMEs from all over the world, really taking unilateral action to align their operations with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we also need to see that governments are pushing ahead and providing a really coherent policy framework so that we're all moving in the same direction. And on Article 6 specifically, I think Stefano very clearly outlined, what the key to a successful Article 6, what those elements look like. And I know on IETA's website, there's a whole host of policy recommendations for those that want to get a little bit deeper into the very specifics of each element of Article 6. And ICC also has policy recommendations for parties on our website. And again, it just goes to ambition, transparency, clarity, and coherence.
Perfect. Thank you, Majda. Best of luck for the times ahead. It's going to be busy, but you guys are doing really important work over there.
Thank you. It is going to be really interesting to see in the negotiations, with so much focus on Article 6, with most of the rulebook established already, how we are able to kind of overcome both the technical and political obstacles that Stefano was mentioning when we have the ability to focus on quite a complicated aspect of the Paris Agreement, but hopefully with more attention on Article 6 and with the COP25 presidency led by the Chilean Environment Minister, Carolina Schmidt, very focused on ambition and getting Article 6 done. I hope that we will get there and have a good results at COP25 and just be able to really continue that ambition story into 2020.
Yeah, now speaking of 2020, actually, that was going to be one of my last questions to both of you. All of us are following the news. When you take a look at all of the fires in Australia and Brazil and, everywhere around the world, it's easy to get pessimistic about where we're going with climate change and different government policies. But what are you both optimistic about as we move into 2020? And maybe, Stefano, we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. So if we start by assuming that we will have a good outcome on Article 6 at COP25, I think there will be quite a lot to be optimistic about. And first of all, it's worth reminding that having a rule set agreed on Article 6 will not be the end of the process, but it will be just the first step of what needs to happen to really unleash the potential of Article 6. After we get rules at COP25, which will hopefully give enough clarity and confidence for both parties and the private sector to start planning for the use of Article 6, I think we can expect to see a new round of NDCs, so a new round of commitments being put forward at COP26 next year, with more ambition built in them, but also with more provisions and plans to make use of the potential of Article 6. I think it's interesting to consider that in the INDC, so in the intended nationally determined contributions that were put forward in the run-up to the Paris COP, around 50% of them made references to the intention of using international markets as part of their NDC achievement. And that was even before we knew that we were going to have an Article 6 in the agreement. So having clarity on the fact that we have Article 6 now, and hopefully having clarity on what Article 6 guidance will look like after COP25 will enable parties to really start planning for the use of Article 6 and the implementation of Article 6 approaches as a way to meet their NDC achievement and as a way to increase their NDC ambition, because at the end of the day, that is really what Article 6 is all about. It is a tool for countries to raise their ambition, and also, let's not forget, to engage the private sector in the NDC achievement and in raising the ambition of the NDC.
Great, Majda, did you want to add onto that as well?
Absolutely, yes. Well, like Stefano, I am optimistic going into 2020. We are really seeing around the world grassroots mobilization for climate action, and whether this is from business with the Chamber's Climate Coalition and the 1.5 pledge, or whether it's coming from cities and regions or the youth community, we are seeing a real mobilization all around the world from individuals saying that climate needs to really be at the forefront of our political decisions. We see that there are more and more people listening to the science, and we also see that governments are increasingly working with other stakeholders, such as local communities and the business community, to develop and review and implement their nationally determined contributions. And so just seeing that there are more and more partnerships and cooperation, not just amongst the governments, but also with all other stakeholders. I think this is a really good sign that we can really move forward together towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. And I'm hopeful that we will continue to build on the Ambition Alliance that the Chilean government has created in the lead up to COP25, and we'll hopefully be able to build on this going into 2020, and also not just taking a climate focus, but also ensuring that all of the SDGs, so the Sustainable Development Goals, that include biodiversity, gender equality, affordable and clean energy, and ensuring that no one is really left behind, and that we move forward to a world that is more equal, and one where both people and planet are safeguarded.
So just concluding, I would like to remind everyone that IETA will be present at COP for the both weeks. We will have a pavilion which is called the IETA Business Hub, which will organize a number of side events and meetings throughout the 2 weeks. So if you want to find out more about key events that will be going on at COP, please have a look at our website, ieta.org, where you can find a web page dedicated to COP25. And beyond that, I think it's also worth remembering that IETA, together with the ICC, WBCSD, and other key partners, will also be involved in the organization of the Bingo Day, which will also be a good occasion to meet representatives from the business community and talk about the other role that business can play in help achieving the long-term target of the Paris Agreement.
Absolutely, yes. And Stefano referred to bingo, and this is really one of the many terms of jargon that we use at the COP negotiations. It stands for Business and Industry Non-Governmental Organizations, or BINGO. So as I mentioned at the top of the livecast, ICC is the focal point for business and industry. So you'll also hear us referred to sometimes as the bingo focal point. And as the bingo focal point, we host business briefings every morning from 9 until 10 o'clock. And so I think if there was one message for business community to know heading into COP, if they're attending, they should really come to these business briefings every morning. Stefano and the CEO of IETA, Dirk Forrester, will be there. We have lots of real business experts who are following the negotiations involved in those business briefings every morning. And it's a good meeting point to know where you need to be that day, what is happening in the negotiations, and what key events are happening for business. So I really look forward to seeing any business delegates at those business briefings, again, from 9 till 10 every morning. And perhaps just a personal note of thanks to Stefano for all of his hard work in making sure that the business community over the years is prepared and understands what is happening in the Article 6 negotiations. And it's been a real pleasure to also have him on this livecast today.
And thank you as well, Majda.
Yeah, of course, and thank you, Majda, for all the hard work that you and the team at the ICC is doing to make sure that business has all these opportunities to engage and to be visible at COP.
So thank you again, both of you, for your time. This is an important conversation for us at the ICC and for the industry at large and the business community. So as a reminder, we are hosting live broadcasts every month, so sign up on our website for free and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the ICC Livecast. See you next time.